I've just realized the microphone might not have been turned on for the last few minutes, which would be a complete heartbreaker if we have to do this again. So this might be the second edit if the sound didn't work in the first round, but I was just saying I've brought clusters, or I'll be bringing clusters into the group classes for the next couple of weeks. We've just come off the end of a 4-week block where we've been focusing on improving our bench 1RM, so it's a bench block. Now, the longer somebody is training, 4 weeks probably won't be enough time. Well, 4 weeks won't be enough time to peak for a bench, say, an advanced trainee. They'll need a longer time to get themselves sharp or get themselves ready. So we've had a few of our members have been here longer that just did not get the max or that 1RM at the end of those 4 weeks. And as I said, I kind of prepared people in advance that might be the case. One thing I have seen is, apart from the physiological side of things, psychologically, it can be daunting or it can be a shock for some people when it comes down to that day to try a 1RM. You can just see mentally they tend to break down a little bit. And this is something I've been looking at more lately. I was listening to a podcast and they're talking about John Kiely's studies around periodization. I thought John Kiely was an Australian lecturer. He's actually Irish. I think he's based in the University of Limerick. But he's been looking at allostasis versus homeostasis, and basically how there's a lot of factors at play when it comes to improving the body in terms of sports performance. In the past, I think it was always a done thing to quote Hans Selye's studies around general adaptation syndrome gas when it comes to, you know, stress and adaptation and getting the right amount of stress to get the most favorable adaptations in their training. But in recent years, there's been some flaws, or at least some flaws have been uncovered in Selye's studies. And he himself never intended or wanted his studies to be put into a sporting template. But one of the things that his studies, from my knowledge, is that it differentiates or it separates the brain from the body in terms of psychological and physiological responses to stress. So we'd have his stages of stress, which would be all physiological. And again, general adaptation syndrome, he would say that all organisms go through the same processes when they're faced with stress. Now, these studies, or allostasis, would say that there's all sorts of different various processes across various components: psychological, physiological, immunological. So essentially, basically, that the brain is very much involved in a organism or in a human's response to stress. And this transfers to sports. And anecdotally, I've seen it over the years where someone could be physically peaking strong, but then something can happen mentally or psychologically, and then they just fail their task for whatever psychological reason as well. And this is one thing that I've seen in the last few weeks, in the last week with our bench block, is just essentially, as the weight gets heavy, some people tend to get psyched out. And this is where clusters can be useful. Clusters allow us to lift a heavy weight for multiple repetitions within a set or within a workout. It exposes us to higher percentages for more repetitions. There is arguments that physiologically there's no real difference between performing cluster sets and performing standard sets. But again, you're just not going to be able to do the given repetitions if you're performing the percentages. Say, for instance, here I'm performing 85% roughly for 3 sets of 5. I know right now I wouldn't be able to do this for straight reps of 5. That's why clusters are going to be useful for me here, because they will allow me to perform 15 reps over this workout. Whereas I know if I tried a 3x5 scenario, I wouldn't be able to do it right now with 90 kilos. So psychologically, it does prepare me. It gets me used to getting under a heavy bar. And also with clusters, we want to rack the bar and unrack the bar every repetition as well. And that's a skill in itself too, is maintaining tension as you take the bar out of the rack, getting that feel for keeping tight as you take the bar out of the rack, and also just the feeling of that weight in our hands. So all of these things will help to drive a psychological response as well as a physiological response. Something I've seen happen as well is when people are taking a bar out of a rack for a heavy set or a heavy single, I have seen them say, "Oh, this feels heavy," out loud, which I'm just thinking to myself, it doesn't never the appropriate or the most beneficial mindset to have. So I think I'll be interested to see. I want to get the folks that did struggle with that 1RM attempt to practice clusters for a few weeks. This gives you kind of an insight into our programming here as well, because it's not a case of like, oh, well, you missed that, let's try it again next week. We try to have a model or a framework, or definitely some sort of methodology or pathway to allow us to hit that weight in a few weeks. Again, we can argue that, you know, all models are false or what not to, but we can get too nihilistic there. I think it's useful to have something as a framework, but that's where we try and mix these frameworks with our own anecdotal experiences when we have been coaching people too, and to take from, I think I might have said it before, Mladen Jovanovic's agile periodization. It's a top-down versus a bottom-up approach as well too, where we just want to there's many factors essentially you have to take into account, not just physiological, not just the amount of repetitions and sets you are doing per week. There's a huge psychological element as well, and that's where, again, clusters can be really beneficial in allowing us more exposure to a certain stress, psychologically as well as physiologically. Okay, so this is the whole benefit of clusters. I know right now if I was to try 5 reps with 90 kilos out in rest, I'd probably get pinned under the bar. So this allows me to get exposure to that higher percentage, that intensity, but with little rests. So over the course of the workout, I'll be able to get or achieve more repetitions at a given percentage. And I know we can argue that all models are false, but they're definitely useful in terms of having some sort of reference, some sort of framework. And I think from there, you hear of the likes of Mladen Jovanovich, people who have read his books too about agile periodization. And that's always something that kind of resonated with me, because I am more of an anecdotal coach. I have very minimal academic qualifications, so lots of certifications over the years. And I think my 3rd decade of coaching. So I just see a lot of things repeat themselves, and you know, and sometimes I see a disconnect between textbooks and what's happening in the real world. That's not to disregard, you know, one for the other entirely, but it's interesting now for me to read about this Allostasis and John Kiely, who is actually, I think, maybe currently he's a lecturer in the University of Limerick. I thought he was Australian, turns out he's Irish. Again, my academic knowledge isn't great, I should probably know who he is a long time ago, but really enjoying reading some of his papers. They're actually quite accessible for someone like myself. Like ultimately, as coaches, we can't predict with any real certainty the outcome of any block of training. Again, models can be useful to help us, give us a direction, but you know, again, you've got to mix your own experiences as well with models. And this is where I've just seen with the people that I'm training over the years that there is a skill to lifting heavier weights. Even before people get under a barbell, for a 1RM, I have to say to them in advance, listen, this will feel heavy, this will be a bit of a fight, or it should be a bit of a fight here. You know, trust the training you've done to this point. In other sports, I've seen people kind of say to themselves, oh, listen, I'll take it easy in training today, but on game day, I'll push it harder. And that never really happens. So I think it is important to replicate your game day scenarios a little bit. And that's why, again, clusters can be useful, because it gets us under a heavy weight for multiple repetitions and exposes that stress. So whether you can argue physiologically if there is any true adaptations being made there, I think psychologically, I believe psychologically that there is. And this is something I'm going to try. It's only a small test pool here with regards to the members I have here over the last block, but at least going to try this now. This even gives you an idea of the type of training that we do here. I'm going to try and apply this particular strategy to the people that didn't quite hit that bench one around the last block, and even see over the course of a few weeks if that does help them then in another attempt at one around, say in 4 weeks' time. So yeah, that was my second set. I think the bar moved a bit faster. It felt a bit tighter than my previous set. And that's something I find in particular on pressing exercises, overhead press, benching, that the first set can generally feel like shit. Again, it could be psychological. I always say it's a bit of a bell curve. It could be just, anecdotal bro science terms of waking up the nervous system or practicing bar path, or again, just psychologically getting yourself ready. I understand warm sets should help with that, but again, getting into those heavier sets, things always feel a little bit different. So it could be a bell curve where your body's getting warmed up or nervous system's getting aroused, you're getting in the zone. Middle sets are generally the best ones, then fatigue kicks in. That bell curve will come back down. But I always find, the middle sets, or at least the second set's normally my best set when it comes to the pressing exercises. I really hope this was working for the first 5 minutes there. Classic Dave. Whew. I was probably at my limit there. I think rep number 4 was a bit grindy. That's because I got my breathing, my setup a bit wrong as well. I rushed unracking the bar. Again, that's good practice too. It stress tests the system, the setup a little bit, and it gives us then something to focus on and work on as you go forward. So that's going to be the plan. I'm going to try to incorporate some clusters into my own training for the next few weeks, because again, I feel like my sub-max sets have been going well at the moment. I understand in order to really elicit strength gains, you probably need to be lifting 85% or more consistently. And this is another thing too as well. I think if you're only lifting once a week in a certain lift, it's a longer training, it's very difficult to get good at that lift. You probably want to be training multiple times per week at that lift, which is what I'm doing. But again, I've probably been working at sub-max weights too much. Now that's good in one way because I'm coming back from an injury. But again, to elicit those true strength gains, and the longer that one has been training as well, and again, this is all relative. I've been training for a long time. I'm not particularly strong on the bench. I've hit 1.5 times body weight once. I'd like to do that again soon. But again, for that, I do need to be practicing at higher intensities. And this is where I'm going to just incorporate clusters for a few weeks to see if that helps. And if I can bridge the gap then between my 5 RMs, my 3 RMs, and then hopefully soon working up towards a 1 RM. So that's it. Let's see how it goes. I have to check my microphone every few seconds to make sure it is still recording. But hopefully you got something from this. Any questions, just ask in the comments below. And maybe you can get big and strong and have a 90 kilo bench like me.